On this episode of Substance, we have Kare Anderson, an Emmy Award-winning journalist from NBC and the Wall Street Journal. She's also an author of Moving from Me to We. Well, thank you for joining us here today. I appreciate it. Thank you. I wanted to just jump right in and ask you a couple questions about, I want to talk to you about your background, because that's one of the most interesting things to me, but one of the things that I think I want to hear about most here up front is how you see the power of a question, especially as a journalist. The power of a question can accentuate the response or the answer so much more deeply, not just in writing, but also in what we're experiencing and what we were talking about before in audio and visual and all these different mediums that are coming out. So how do you think the question is being asked, and is it being asked correctly in today's social society?
Well, people ask questions in different ways, and it's a hard art to learn, ironically, so it's a great place to start because it's sort of like the power of white space, what isn't said or asked. And I believe when you want to give a deep interview, you're searching for what's most on their mind. It's like fishing. When you hook onto something, then it pulls them in. So to ask questions that might be broad, it might be personal, and then to follow up with whatever they most intensely respond to. Mm-hmm. And when they get involved and the energy gets higher, negative or positive, you know you're on a ride somewhere. Now that doesn't work for print journalists because we're usually after a very specific story. But the way that everybody is engaged now and has a chance to have their own style, I think everybody should have their own style of questions and what helps them bring out somebody else, because that's the best questioners that I've enjoyed, like you were such a good listener on the phone. That's what people want. They want to feel heard, and in saying things out loud, they want to sometimes know how they really feel.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're looking at today's journalistic market, and you're looking at content that's being built by people online every day that didn't necessarily study journalism,
right.
Doesn't it beg the question that everybody's becoming a journalist?
Well, any art you hone more, you get better at, with brilliant exceptions, of course. So I've enjoyed watching some people just become naturals, who are deep listeners, who pull things out of people, who do the right kind of advanced preparation. I still believe it's a very important thing to be able to write it well or video it well or know the angle that turns it into a small snapshot, a story with a kicker, with something unexpected, but that it rings true. It doesn't have to be sensationalistic to have extraordinary interestingness. Mm-hmm. So that's a deft art to listen deeply.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the ways that you've seen this change over the last couple years, where listeners are becoming more engagers versus, like you said, stepping back and actually taking a listening role?
This is a great question. I'm coming to believe that it's often the people are semi-awkward or introverts, but so passionate in what they want to learn, that ask the questions and get involved. It makes it fascinating for anybody watching it in video or reading it. So they don't revert it back to themselves completely. They really want to have that person show the interesting part of their strongest passion. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's not people are really, I'm verbally quick, and I like to work on people, Daniel Kahneman, thinking fast and slow. I like to think fast, then have rest of time doing it, like when I'm sculling, and come back again. So going back to your question, I think some people have really rested with the content they're going to interview someone about. They bring a lot of texture to it. They connect the dots that maybe that person hasn't about why they're doing what they're doing. They're saying, when you did that, how did that relate this? Did it help you when you did that? Mm-hmm. So suddenly they're seeing patterns that other person may not have, and said, well, yeah, I think so, mm-hmm. or disagree. So it makes it a more provocative, insightful experience.
Mm-hmm. So how does that relate to telling a story? As you're listening, you're pulling out information from what somebody's saying or from what a company's saying. Mm-hmm. The storyline of a brand right now is accentuated so much with the media as it's growing. Mm-hmm. How's the story changing? How are we able to tell that story maybe in a more powerful way, or is it becoming a less powerful way because it's so intricate?
Well, a couple of quick thoughts. Storytelling is a popular title, but I believe we have the capacity for vignettes, and it's like stepping across a pond with a series of stones, and if there's a missing stone, we lose people. So it's got to be a vignette that pulls them in, or characterization compared to what, or it's like ripped from the headlines, comparing two things. And I'm a big fan of Peter Guber, who wrote Tell to Win, about having a purposeful narrative. I believe you ask questions and you pose situations, but you want to pull people into the story. So every time you say something, are you characterizing a situation or a vignette so they can see a role they want to play and they want to dive in, reshape it, react against it, add to it? Or as Franz Johansson said in the click moment, you've got this hook on which people grab what they want to get and add to it. And so I believe everybody that wants to build something around their brand or their person or their cause, they've got to have that hook, that starting point, that's something where people can take some action on and makes them feel good that they took the action. And that's where I think media is going.
That's interesting, and so that's where I think it's starting to intersect. And I agree with you that it's starting to intersect with pushing everybody into becoming their own journalist,
Yes.
and how they train themselves to find that hook. So how do you find that hook?
Well, I think it's got to be something that people can react to. So, for example, Sheryl Sandberg, they have this site now where you can add your own story. So there's a quick flurry of that, and I think they'll have its momentum and die because there's no future engagement and there's no connectivity amongst the people, and there's no way to rate or rank the ones that are most meaningful. So it has to be something that there's a way to grow. So, for example, I believe the ideal community of the future online is something where it's around a very core specific interest, whether it's cancer survival or a cyclist or whatever. But there's a way that we all say there's 7 basic tips, maybe a book that came out or a brand that has a core message, and you say, I read a book that's like this and here's what I learned, or a saying that mattered to me that's related to that. Or why don't they do it this way instead of this? In other words, I'm adding on to, responding to, or reacting against that. And then if people can become members of that community for free and be self-tagged so it's easy to find them, and you can tag the comments, and you can tag the comments in the comments, and then you crowdsource once a month the best tips. So everybody in that group has 5 equal votes, and they can change them at any time. Then you create a community that's staying alive and changing real time, and you're not making people wrong for being banal or mean. You're rewarding them with e-coupons for the top 10 contributors that month. So I'm thinking of ways where people all hone their value and their visibility by getting better at what serves the community. And that's the way you create hooks that are going to raise people up, be learning vehicles, and give a chance for bragging rights.
Yeah, collaborative content building is certainly growing. Community consensus is growing, and building that content on top of the collaborative, the network, or the community. It seems to me, though, that there needs to be a leader, that within every community there needs to be a leader that's going to take all of that great information and drive it towards something, drive it towards its originality. Is there a place for people to gather? Yes, but in terms of becoming a leader, who is that person? Or is it a brand? How do you become a content leader?
I think there's 2 answers to that. The kind of community I described has never been created. And by its very nature, the crowd is only smarter when they're sufficiently diverse and where they're recognized and rewarded. So this could actually be leaderless, because you always want to see, what does the crowd want? How do I serve it best? I get 2 benefits, an implicit and explicit reward. So putting that aside, I haven't seen communities that do that. So they do need someone to make the bad guys act nicer, to highlight good content, because there's not an incentive to have the cream rise to the top. Now, as the leadership and content, I believe it's going to be a connective style leader. It's someone who says, you've suggested this, and you've suggested that, or you have these different talents. Here's a sweet spot of mutual benefit. Why don't you try creating something around that? Or here's what I see in common. So they're the ones that see the connective patterns and do the introductions, especially with people who are of different temperament and talent, so they can organize around their strongest sweet spot. And sometimes some people aren't good at self-introductions. They'll talk too long about themselves, their own stuff. That's my hot button. they then ask a question and they revert it back to themselves. That's an unconnected leader. And a connective leader, ironically, and I've been coaching this in organizations, they may look unassuming, they may be off the side, people are grandly talking about stuff, and they say, well, after 15 minutes of that sort of crosstalk, it seems like what we have in common right now is this, where should we go? So it's like presumptive close. So some people are going to be the pattern makers or identifiers, and they're going to be the safe center in a skirmish, because people are all arguing or talking across each other. The person that says, well, here's where our content seems to be going that's best, is there anything better? So it's not making people wrong.
Yeah, and there's a general theme there that I think is being really pulled out right now, not just in that area, but across the board, with control.
Yes.
And trying to pull control away when perhaps maybe there's a natural place for everything to grow together, like what you're talking about.
I like the technologies are so simple to use that when you participate in an organization, it's transparent to everybody that someone's not pulling their weight and other people are. And when you notice if top management ignores that, then it's at their own peril. But there's something called work.com where instead of giving annual reviews, I have no financial relationship. I just like the idea. But when you work on a project together, it facilitates how you do it. But you can see who makes and keeps agreement, who doesn't. Everybody can. So if I don't play well in that team, it's highly likely that no one will want me to play in their team in the future, and that's going to take a toll in a good way in a company. And what I like is people that have maybe been socially awkward in some ways, but are really bright. But they're let to shine because they've got the right role, and they keep on feeding just the right information into people. And they may not be good in writing, but they're good verbally, or neither. But someone pulls it out of them and thanks them. So that idea of being connective and seeing the smart part of everybody is where you're going to make a more productive workplace, in my perception.
So let's talk about that a little bit in terms of introvert and extrovert, both as it relates to people and to brands. Because I think that our feeling at PureMatter is that they're one and the same, and you can really apply the same set of rules. How now is it being heightened with social media, and how are we going to? How do you think it's going to bring people out, or will it be addressed in some way for people to feel more comfortable with the way that they come out, or companies even companies that aren't used to being social? How are we going to bring those companies forward, or be heightened by social media?
I think it takes an astute understanding of human nature a little bit. So as Susan Cain said, for example, in Quiet, we were gloriously building all these open workspaces. That doesn't work for me. I like to go to a place and be social in that place, but a lot of introverts want time by themselves. They don't want a mass of friends. They want a few close friends. I like a wide set of acquaintances. So it also means if you're talking live at a meeting, there's certain personalities, quick, smart, got a bunch of ideas quick, that's me. But there's others who just have thought something out and they're 5 paragraphs ahead. So, and this, we studied at Institute for the Future like a decade ago. There's got to be a way that the technology itself, you use different technologies at different stages. So, and you reward people who couldn't think of anything in the meeting, but they emailed the rest of us or sent it by another technology, submit it in Dropbox, where this was their idea and they connect things together. And a company should reward the people that notice the different ways that work in connecting. Like I believe one of the best ways for people who are outgoing and not to get in sync is literally a walk. And I've convinced 2 companies, even in the Midwest, that they do walking meetings and they walk in a half circle, or they actually, one of them, they come up with the way, one team is walking in a circle where they're facing each other, they're going around because it's too cold to go outside, but just to get in rhythm and in sync. And your vital signs to get more in sync. And the more people work together and feel an affinity, then some of the people, the quick speakers, rest for a moment and say, what do you think of that? They give an opening for someone else. And so I think the most adept, productive companies are going to be ones where they train their people on those behavior cues, and they bond, the people bond faster, and they look out for each other's self-interest. They don't revert back to themselves as much. I think right use of different kinds of social media to account for that different left brain, right brain, introvert, extrovert, different expertise. Those people are going to feel a lot more, as Teresa Amabile would say, more nourished at work. They'll see more short wins. That's a promising scenario. The one less promising is when people get together with people just like them and they isolate themselves from others, or they belittle those who don't process in the same way. And that's happening some too.
So you have an affinity for human beings.
Some.
You certainly have a passion for bringing out the best in people, and I think you do a great job at it. Just in our time together, where does that come from for you? Because I think that energy comes through online, and that energy comes through in writing, and it comes through in things that that a lot of people are really trying to figure out. How do you display that energy out into the world through your media? How is that emanated? I think that's on everyone's mind, is how do I be authentic? How do I get the best authentic me out so that it really becomes an interesting piece of who each individual is?
Well, I was raised a Dane, and we're not supposed to talk about ourselves, so I'm going to say that briefly. I was a stutterer growing up, and I was an extreme daydreamer. And the teachers used to get very angry at me because I wasn't answering, I was spacing out, and they saw me as insubordinate. So I realized how much people project onto you. So whatever the teacher's hot button was, they projected that word onto me. I only know that looking back. And my family always talked around me and about me and for me. So I just sat and stared at people and thought, why do people rarely talk about what's really on their mind? But then you sort of grow up and you learn, well, there's reasons you can get in trouble. But skipping to the future, I always thought if you bring out people's better side, there's a less chance for evil to happen. And some of the people that are most worrisome are the ones that are righteous, like after the Lance Armstrong thing. I wrote a column based on Daniel Ariely's thing saying we're all tempted to do bad things. Part of the role of what he teaches is how to limit that temptation. And there's a whole blast of nasty comments. People hadn't read the column, said he's a, and then used all this bad language. Finally, the Forbes people, I was writing the column, said, wow, we're having a censoring a lot. But it's because rather than seeing their dark side, they just want to make people wrong. And I believe if you use your best talent and temperament with people very different than you, there's a way that you learn your authentic side. Like my driving here and being so unnerved because my weak spot is directions. It's a blessing because it's so humbling to me to know that other people can be unnerved by other things. So that's the humbling part. And the humbling part of being a stutterer, a friend of mine who went to Iraq, came back, is in a wheelchair. He said people talk to me as a stutterer because he knew me growing up the way they talked to him. Hi, Bryan. How are you? Sing-songy and a high thing. So then the last part real quickly is I had a wonderful bureau chief in London. He was a curmudgeon, scared the heck out of people. And he came to me and he said, Kare, I send you out in an interview. You ask questions and you keep asking questions and they keep answering. He said, if I sent a guy out, they'd smash his face in. How'd you figure out how to do that? And I started to answer. He said, well, what you're going to do now is 2 stories. You're going to do the hard news story, then you're going to come back and write down all the notes of how they can be a quote for the next one. Whatever you do, they keep talking. So I guess it's good. Get going. And I thought, wow. So it was like, I realized the power, because he has a heart of gold. He remains a friend. But when you can give someone an insight in a way they can hear about a part of them they didn't know they had, or they understated, it's like gold to do that.